right, this is called my 5-minute Daz clothing import, but it's obviously going to take a lot more than 5 minutes because I'm going to cover some things that normally I don't have to worry about. But first things first, we're in Daz. I'm going to load in, open a file. Now I have these templates. You have to have a template from Daz, just like they have to have a template in Blender. So here's my templates, male 8 dummy. I have different templates for the different types. The Genesis 3 covers the Genesis and Genesis 2, as well as Genesis 3 and then Genesis 8. And you also have to do flats versus heels. That's a whole other subject that I'll get into at some point in my life, but maybe not immediately. Anyway, so here's a character. I'm going to, with him selected, I'm going to take a clothing item, a coat. The reason I'm going to do the coat is that it also has some physics involved to it as opposed to other things. So with it selected, I'm going to turn off the Genesis male so you don't see him, you only see the coat. I also turned off his eyebrows. One of the dummy things is I have the eyebrows turned off because otherwise those will export over too. And then you go File, and you Export, and you go to long. I've already done this, obviously. It's like one of those cooking shows. You've already done it. Override it, yes. And here's my settings here in Daz. Again, the important one is 1% here on scale. And then these settings, you might want to look at all these settings. Pause this here, write this down. That works. So that's that. That exports that. Now we're done with Daz. Don't need Daz anymore. So get rid of that. So now in Blender, we go in again. This is the important thing. This is really the key to doing this really easily is you load in your dummies. And I'm going to make these available if you want. But here's the Genesis 8 male dummy. And once again, I have different dummies for the different clothing items, how they come from. Here it comes into Blender. Come in here. I'm going to change this. I can't keep that there. I have this colored in just so it's easier to see. It doesn't really matter one way or the other. This particular model came from Character Creator. So I exported it from Character Creator. I took the base, the base dummy, base male here, and did a file and did export FBX, clothed character. Now it's clothed even though it was naked, but export FBX clothed character, and that creates the character, and it also creates a key file that you'll have to use to load back in later. And then in Blender, I did the hard part. I edited this so it matched up perfectly with the Daz character. So when I bring in a clothing item, it fits perfectly. That's really the whole key, because then you don't have to use conform, and conform doesn't work inside of Character Creator at all, or very poorly. So hopefully that's one of the things they'll fix in Character Creator 3. So now I import this long coat. Oh, I didn't show you, and I didn't do it right. So I should have showed you that. Let me show you that. If you import it the wrong way, once again, I know that I just imported it. So I took the long coat and imported it. Didn't do anything with the options. And look at it, came in all these different items. So the long coat came in as different separate items. See how it's all apart here in different pieces. So you don't want that. You want it to come in as one item. So what we do is we go to File, and when we go to Import, and we go to OBJ. And the reason I forgot is I actually got out of Blender and started over again. So I have a preset, and basically all you have to do is have polygroups selected. So invert order, polygroup selected, that thing. Now when you select long coat and bring it in, it will now come in as one item. See, it only comes in as one item, long coat. So we can select that item. And next thing we want to do is go to, you don't really have to do this step, but I like doing this step. Go to vertex groups and delete them all. Vertex groups, delete all. It just makes it a little better at times. I don't always do this. I don't always remember to do this, but it helps. Now, with the long coat selected, I'm going to go to the Materials tab, and notice how there's two particular materials assigned to this coat. I don't really need two materials assigned. Sometimes there's a dozen, sometimes there's 40 or 50. If they all share the same icon here, they all share the same material and the same UV map, and you don't need separate materials for those. Now, there's some items that you do need. If they have a different icon here, then you want to keep those separate. But because these share the same icon, they're going to share the same materials, and otherwise they'll be duplicated inside of iClone. So inside of Character Creator and iClone. So you go to Edit Mode, and Edit Mode by default selects all the faces the first time through. So now I'm going to just assign those to that coat material. Assign that coat material. And now I can go back to Object Mode and go to the other material and just, didn't want to do that. Just delete that material. Okay? So now I only have the one coat material. And like I said, if you have 40 or more, you can delete them all. It's a kind of a pain to have to go through and delete them all. But once again, if they share the same icon, the same little icon up here, and they'll have different ones at times, and you can keep those different. But otherwise, you can consolidate them, and it makes it a lot easier to work with them later. Okay, next thing is a real step. You just shift. I'm shifting, and I'm holding down the shift key, and then I'm pressing this big old bone here. That's the main root bone, and then I'm doing Control P with empty groups. That makes it part of this armature. It assigns it to this armature. Now we select the base body first, and holding down the shift key again, we select long coat, and then we go to weight paint. You've seen these in tutorials a number of times, but I'm just going to go through the reason mine's a little different is, once again, I'm on this dummy that's molded perfectly to that. And you can tell it's molded perfectly because if we go through all the different things, there's no pink showing up here anywhere. You can see there's no little pink areas of the skin poking through, which there would be if you had to conform this. You don't want to have to conform this. You just want to leave this alone. We go to transfer weights, and we change the source layer to the by name layer. Simple, simple, simple. And now my other key is you have to use my blur all routine, which I'll also provide for you guys. Blur all blurs the weight maps here. If we go into, we're on the coat, so if we go into the vertex groups will transferred over there. Remember I always showed we got rid of all the vertex groups. And we go here, and you can see how blocky that the vertex group transferring is. We don't want that blockiness, because when it deforms, it will deform in a blocky manner. We want it to be nice, smooth deforming. And to do that, we use my blur routine. You can blur it manually if you want, but there's a lot of different vertex groups to have to go down here. I think I counted one time, I think there's 62, I think, something in the neighborhood. And to do all those by hand will take you hours. And plus you have to do front and the back. So this goes through, it takes a little bit of time. You notice it takes a little time. You might get a cup of coffee or something. But it goes through all the ones that it has to go through, all the relevant ones. It leaves aside all the ones it doesn't have to blur, because there's some that don't have any weighting attached to them, like the bone root isn't weighted at all. But the ones it does, it blurs. And there's another option on here. Unfortunately, I've scrolled down a little bit too much so you can't see it. But when you install my add-on to Blender, there's also an option to blur for feet or gloves, or for shoes or gloves. That's because when I blur these main groups, I don't blur the hand groups or the foot groups, because they don't normally have a problem in this. Here, we go down here. There it is, gloves or shoes. But if you do gloves or shoes, you have to do the fingers and the toes. So I want to have those in. So now if we go back to that waist group, see, notice how much smoother that weighting is. See how that smoothed that all out? Well, that's what we want. So now we're all smooth, and now we go to export and FBX. And we go down to armature, and we take off the leaf bones. Another very important thing, got to take off those leaf bones. And go to downloads, and we'll call this long code. I've already done this. It's already there, but it's one of those cooking shows, where you do things in advance. And this is going to take a while too, and not a long while, but a little bit of time, depending upon what you're exporting, how big it is, and the size of the textures and all that stuff. It takes a while to export. But when it's all done, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Character Creator and just load this back in. And the other thing about this particular item, the reason I chose this is that it's well, I'll talk about it in a second. It could have some physics involved. So we're going to go to Character Creator as soon as this is done exporting. I could cut this part out so you don't have to wait. The cooking show you know what, I could. No, never mind. Have a drink of water. I'm going to cut all this out. Yeah, all right. And there we go. So now we're all set. We're going to come in here, and we're going to load in that coat. Whoops, long coat. There it is. Long coat. And then we have to load in the decrypt key file. Remember I told you that comes from when you export that base character. So in this particular case, I have all these different key files. I'm going to load in the Genesis 8.1 and do that. Because it has to match up with the character you did. And then, of course, it comes in. Now, if you're successful, if you get errors here, then you didn't do it right. You didn't follow some of the steps I followed. And you want to assign it a number that correlates to what kind of item it is. You can change this later inside of Character Creator, but it's easier to do at the start. 13 is for coats. 5 is for pants. 7 is for shirts. You kind of get to where you kind of know these items as you go. And so there it is. Now, it doesn't look great right now because, number one, it's not PBR. So we're going to immediately go in here and change this to PBR. And that makes it look a lot nicer. Just doing that makes it look a lot nicer. And the next thing we want to do is because when you do this from DAZ, you normally only get the base color. It normally doesn't assign the other maps to it. Sometimes it'll bring over a bump map. Sometimes I haven't quite figured out why it does sometimes and not other times. But in any case, I have all the other maps here in another folder. And the way I found those is you got to find those where they are from DAZ. So if you're in DAZ, you can find them usually by finding out, you go into here or here, it doesn't matter, one of the characters, and then you kind of pause over and see it says the author is Anna Benjamin. You see where it says Anna Benjamin? I happen to know her in DAZ. I bought a lot of her stuff, and she abbreviates her name to A. Ben. So you go into the content, the runtime, the textures, and A. Ben, and you can find the textures that she has. So that's something you're gonna have to get used to in finding out, as you search through. But you're gonna have to find the directory for those particular people, and then you just load in all the textures. So here's the bump maps. I'm gonna drag over the normal from that thing, that sort of thing. And again, if she does, and she does, I like her textures a lot because she has the metallic textures and she has the roughness textures for everything. So she actually has all the right textures for the stuff. But you load it in. All right, so you got all that. You might notice one thing about this is that you can see through the coat there. See, a lot of times, most of the time, even lapels on here, you're going to want to change these items to two-sided. Then two-sided, create it two-sided. That you don't have to. Not every item has to be two-sided, but most of them have to be because of the way they show up. So it never hurts. It doesn't hurt in processing time to make it two-sided. So I make a lot. So now we would be done at this point in time. If you went to calibrate and you did, a typical male pose, this would conform well. You notice there's no problem. I said earlier you don't want to go to this conform button, and I'll talk about that now. Sometimes when you bring an item over, you might see some points here where the skin is poking through. It isn't here. I'm trying to find a place where it might be. It doesn't, but sometimes it does. And you might say, well, Mike, if I go up to this conform button, I can get rid of that. And yes, you can. If you go to conform with the item selected, you have to have item selected. If you go to conform and you can change the loose settings or even just hitting calculate collision on its own, and we'll take care of that. But if you change anything, like loose settings or increase the size or whatever, and even calculate collision, it will alter the mesh itself. And sometimes that's okay. It only needs to be slightly altered to get rid of those poke-throughs. But much of the time when you do that, this conform is just horrible. So what I would far prefer to do is if you do it with a dummy like I have that makes it a perfect fit so you don't have to use conform, then if you do have a little bit of poke through from time to time, if something pokes through on there, go ahead and just hide the meshes. You know how to do that. You go with the thing with the item selected. You go in here to edit mesh mode, and then you can select the mesh, and then you can go down here and hide it once you have something selected like that. You can go to hide. Okay, so you have a big hole in this guy's butt, abdomen. So I think this is much better. It gets smoother clothing, but to each his own. You can do whatever you want. But I will tell you this right now. Conform is worthless when it comes to trying to make the clothing actually work right. So you can use it when you have multiple layers, but I think you're still far better off hiding the individual meshes underneath. That's just my opinion. Okay, last thing to do is, because this is a coat, you notice how when you move it around, it does things, and the guy moves. It does move. But because it's open here at the bottom, this bottom section, it would look a lot better if this kind of flowed openly. Maybe even the lapels a little bit. So to do that, to actually make that work, what we'd have to do is we have to turn on physics for this. And we have to put a weight map in. And no, you're not going to get any weight maps that come over from DAZ. That's just not going to happen. The good news is most of the time they're easy to construct. And we'll go in and you go in here and you click on this is the UVs for the whatever. This is the UVs for the mapping. So if I go here and I show you the UVs in Photoshop or whatever your text editor is, this is the different pieces of that particular cloak. And most of the times it's pretty easy to map a weight map. You can see here, for example, you don't have to be a genius in clothing to know that this is the back of the cloak. And these are the sleeves here. You get used to this when you see it. And these are the sides. These are the two sides. That's how people sew things. And this is the front of the opening. And the reason that this is the front, this is curved because this will attach to this curved piece here. You get used to that. Sometimes a UV will come in so convoluted and messed up that the only thing you have to do to get a weight map painted is to go to 3D Coat, for example, which you can do that and then paint it directly on. And I've had some good luck doing that. But when it's simple like this, you can just go in and just select, all of those 3 items there. And then I can just paint a gradient because that's how I want this to deform. And so that gradient is there. And then I can do select, inverse, and then edit and fill with, try to drag over my other monitor, show you that. So I have a weight map here. And then I just save this as a weight map, which I've already done. And I'll show you those weight maps. And that'll work fine. And that's what you can do. So the weight maps that I've saved here are here. So there's the first one I saved, which is kind of this map here. And when I saved it first and then I tried it, now let me show you how we tried this. So we go in, I'm going to have to change this, this mesh because it's bothering the hell out of me. Let's go back here. All right. So with the item selected and with the this guy selected and with the weight map loaded in, we have the weight map loaded in. So now we're going to how do we test the weight map? Well, we have to send it to iClone. So we go here, we export, we send the character to iClone. And so what we're doing now is in iClone, we have it in the background. It's going to load it up. So the first thing to test it is we need to assign the right collision shapes. So we go down to collision shapes. We're in Modify tab, collision shapes. And I'm going to load in the Christian collision shapes. And that's from that Christian. Everybody has Christian, I would hope, at this point in time. You can save out his collision shapes. His are the only good ones for the men, and Natalie for the women. So you want to save those out and use those. So now we have collision shapes loaded in. The other thing we want to do is load in some perform so we can see it. And I like this Mason walk bump into object for men. Heidi, sometimes I use the pirouette. And sometimes for the men I use the pirouette instead of that. But that's just because I'm perverse. Okay, so now we've got this loaded in. We can go ahead and run this. I'm running it by frame, but you notice it's breaking through down here a little bit, okay? Don't get excited. Don't get overly excited about this. I used to get overly excited. So part of the problem is we haven't really specified any particular, so I'm selecting the coat. We haven't specified any particular physics for this. So I'm going to go in and select, let's say denim is a good choice for this because the coat's kind of heavier. Even leather might be good. But in any case, you select that, and then the collision shape, I know by experience, probably needs to be bumped up a little bit here. Maybe even 2.5 would be okay, but you can play with that. So now when we go through this and run this, you can see now it's not penetrating through, and now it looks pretty good. It's not bad. Later on, I made another map where I edited, where I added some, and I also increased it a little bit because I felt like his butt needed to conform a little bit. So later on, I added some support for the butt, and I also added some lapel support. Remember, we saw those lapels, so that I painted up the side for the lapels there on there. So just to make it a little more, I didn't go crazy about it, but now you can see the lapels move a little bit more, and there's a little bit more on the butt, and whatever. It's not. I wish I could tell you this was a science. It's more of an art than a science, but it is what it is. So in any case, when you get it how you like it, then what you do with the whole thing selected, you got to select the whole guy, is then you go back here and you go to Edit in Character Creator. Okay. So what that's going to do is send it back to Character Creator. So now, and you're not going to save this one because this is the one that you exported first, and you actually have now played around with the weight settings and the weight and the physics maps. So you want to preserve those physics maps things that you saved. So you want to load the project, and you don't want to save this one. And it's going to load it back in. And so now this is the new one, the new coat. And now with that selected, you can go ahead and save it. You can go out and save it. I've already saved my coat, so I don't want to save it anymore. But that's basically it. That's how fast it is. It's not rocket science. It doesn't take long as you have a dressmaker's dummy that fits the clothing perfectly. If you don't, you're going to have all kinds of issues, and I don't even want to talk to you about all that because it took me months to figure all that stuff out.